This is Steve Zeltzer with KPFA Workweek Radio, and I'm talking with Brian Gruzalski. Brian was a mechanic at FedEx, at LAX, and he and other mechanics there noticed that there were serious health and safety problems at FedEx in Los Angeles, the LAX. And he began to raise issues about some of these safety problems and was retaliated against. He recently won, along with others, a lawsuit against FedEx. And I wanted to get into what happened at FedEx and the issues that he raised and why they're important not only to the mechanics but the public. Welcome to Workweek Radio, Brian.
Yes, I'm here.
Good. So, Brian, why don't you talk about, first of all, your background?
I grew up with it. My father had a shop on Midway Airport in Chicago and then rebuilt salvage after he got rid of that shop. Rebuilt salvage aircraft and did a lot of work on Warbirds, P-51 Mustangs and stuff. So I grew up around it my whole life. And
what's involved? I mean, most people, if they're not airline mechanics, have no idea of the kind of requirements and certifications that are involved. What is involved in becoming a certified airline mechanic in the United States?
Well, most people go to school and you have to take a series of tests. Or you can go through those series of tests based on your experience. Either way, the tests are the same to prove your knowledge through the FAA. And that's pretty much it. The biggest problem is that I see is people get out of school with no practical experience, and they get their license, and a lot of these companies and FedEx made the case was, they have the same qualifications, but they don't have any experience.
And what kind of requirements for health and safety take place in the airlines and in FedEx for planes to be airworthy?
Well, there's certain criteria. When you do inspections, everything has to be fixed, especially when it goes through heavy maintenance, is what was being performed at LAX. If you find any discrepancies with the aircraft, I was in their structural department, so this discrepancies usually revolved around cracks in the fuselage, and corrosion was a huge issue, a very time-consuming issue, and one that FedEx didn't want to properly address. And that's where my problem started. You have to, it all has to be documented and then repaired properly. And it wasn't being, a lot of the repairs weren't being done properly.
Well, when you talk about corrosion of a plane, why wouldn't the plane be properly protected to protect it from corrosion?
Well, airliners, most of these airplanes, the cargo planes, are old passenger airplanes that were worn out and pretty much not feasible for the airlines to fly anymore. So the problem being is there's a lot of areas that trap moisture from leaking lavatories, the waste tanks, from the bathrooms, and that's all corrosive. And just over the course of time, especially when you have two different kinds of metal together, it causes corrosion, which causes eventual cracks in the fuselage, and it could end up being what they call explosive decompression, which would, cause a catastrophic accident.
So this is a life and death issue for the pilots at FedEx and also the public if a plane crashed in an area where there were people living.
Exactly. If and there's issues with cracks too. I mean, there's major cracks in some of these airplanes are 40 years old that are being flown by FedEx or older, and you can't ever determine, okay, this is where it's going to break. They've been lucky in the past when they've had accidents. It's been on the runway. Like in 2016, they had a crash with the DC-10, which is what I worked on. And the pilots were lucky enough to get out of the airplane, and the airplane was a total loss with fire, but it happened on the runway, so they got lucky with that.
And was that due to improper safety procedures or not safety procedures that weren't being properly done because of the company?
Yeah, the NTSB came out with a report, and the manufacturer wanted the landing gears changed at a certain time. I believe it was 8 years, and FedEx decided to ignore that and go for 9 years. Well, it failed. The landing gear failed and snapped off the airplane due to corrosion, and a crack about 200 days past the 8 years it was recommended for it to be changed.
So, in other words, FedEx was not following the requirements under the FAA.
Exactly.
And what happened to them when they don't follow those regulations?
You know, if it was a small company, they'd probably be put out of business. But with FedEx, I haven't seen anything. With my complaints, it substantiated most of them. They should have substantiated all of them, but the FAA has an enforcement website, and I've seen nothing in regards, no fines, no enforcement actions. I know that internally they put in a couple programs, but the FAA hasn't, to my knowledge, fined FedEx whatsoever.
So how long was it before you were noticed that there were safety issues at FedEx? How long did you work for FedEx?
You know, it was a short period of time, few months. I noticed little things, you know, that were easily corrected. And then the longer I was there, the worse it got. And I think a lot of that was due to the economy and FedEx's implementation of the lean program, 5S as they call it.
And what was the lean program?
The lean program is a manufacturing process. So, like, if you have a manufacturing company that's building cars or whatever, it's to cut out all the excess and try and streamline everything to make bigger profits. Well, FedEx implemented this on their aircraft maintenance, and airplanes were taking somewhere around 38 days in heavy maintenance, and they wanted to take that down to 22 days to save money. And in that process, they created a culture where people were ignoring serious issues with the airplane to get them out in a 22-day span.
So they wanted to increase productivity even if it meant that they weren't actually doing the proper repairs that were required under the law?
Correct.
So you began to notice that there were serious safety issues. What kind of safety issues did you notice, and what were they, and what happened?
The biggest issues was corrosion on the airplanes. When there's corrosion in the fuselage of the airplane, it tends to be a lengthy repair. You have to cut it out, make big doublers, and so on. So it takes a lot of time, and as we were told in town hall meetings that the structures sheet metal department was, I believe the word they used, a bottleneck. And they needed to relieve the bottleneck. And then shortly thereafter, we were being mandated on how we were going to do stuff and harassed and intimidated to try and, the way we saw it, to try and get us from, keep us from even addressing the problem.
And how did they intimidate you?
They threatened to file felony charges of vandalism against me for putting a hole in the airplane. Senior manager did that. I was constantly, when I would find a problem, I would get written up. FedEx took the position that if I complained about a bad repair or something not getting done properly, that I was making false and malicious statements against my coworkers. Seemed to be the pattern. Every time I made a complaint, I would get written up.
And there were other mechanics who you were working with who also filed complaints. Did the same thing happen to them?
Yes, my lead filed a complaint with the FAA. He complained numerous occasions to the company. My manager, after a while, figured out what was going on and started sticking up for us. He got retaliated against. And a couple more mechanics. But, you know, FedEx pays really well, so it was really hard to get anybody, you know, to back you up. Not that I was looking for that, but people were, you know, scared for their jobs.
So when you began to make these complaints, they started retaliating against you, punishing you. Is that legal for them to do that?
No, it's not. It's not. Even it came out during court was even some of the HR people were trying to warn the senior manager and managing director that, hey, you know, this is a whistleblower. You need to back off, basically. And they didn't.
And you went to OSHA eventually. What happened at OSHA, and was OSHA successful in defending you and the other whistleblowers?
No, OSHA. I went to OSHA and I went to the FAA. I went to OSHA when I got terminated with hopes of getting my job back. And actually, I went to them right before I did get terminated, and they didn't do much at all. It drug out and I couldn't get any contact with the woman that was handling my case, and I had to plead for help from them to get a different investigator on it. At one point, in which I did, I had got Mr. Whitman on my case.
And what happened with him? Did he do an investigation?
Yes, he got involved right at the tail end. The FAA did an investigation, and they claimed they did an investigation, which they didn't. And I complained to them, and at the same time, they opened up another whistleblower complaint, which they actually investigated. And Daryl got involved about that time, and he got retaliated against because he was finding merit in my claims. And I ended up having to withdraw my OSHA complaint because it was going nowhere, and my OSHA investigator was getting retaliated against, and he ultimately got fired also.
Now, you went to a trial. How long did it take you to get a trial?
Oh, it was it was 5 years from when I was able to file, my lawyer was able to file. The really bad part about all of it was, for me, was our company, FedEx, has a policy. It's called Guaranteed Fair Treatment. They put it out there to try and keep the mechanics from going union. You know, they claim they have all the support and same policies that you would if you had a union, and the pay is good. But they drug, apparently, without my knowing it, within the paperwork when I got hired, they had me sign an arbitration agreement where if I couldn't sue them after 6 months. I had 6 months to sue them if I got terminated. I didn't know about that.
So they basically tried to limit your right to sue them.
Well, they did. They did more than that. They defrauded me in the way that they did that. So this isn't laying in the background. I had no idea about it. They have this guaranteed fair treatment. It's a 3-step process where you can appeal to get your job back. So I went through that process. That process went 3 days short of the 6 months. I believe it was 3 to 5 days short of the 6 months, and I still didn't know about it. So they basically left me 3 days to get a lawyer and sue them. But that didn't hold up in court. They saw through that.
So it sounds like they were spending a lot of money fighting you, both from suing them and also even getting to a court trial.
Correct. And even in court, this guaranteed fair treatment that's supposed to protect the employee and make sure everything is fair and you're not getting retaliated against, a VP from Memphis said on the stand that looking at my complaints of retaliation and aircraft safety, that was not the scope of their investigation after I got terminated. All they did was, this is my words, all they did was basically justify firing me.
And so you finally got a trial. What happened in that trial?
Oh, the trial took, to me, forever. I think we're from August 28th till like a week ago, was 7 weeks. FedEx misquoted, misstated, falsified what the maintenance manuals would say, and tried to make myself, my lead, look like we were doing illegal stuff, which we weren't. And they would claim that the manuals would say, the manual doesn't say you're allowed to do that, but the manual doesn't say you're not allowed. It doesn't even address certain things. So they were putting that stuff out there fraudulently. And then after they did that, and then they brought in everybody that got investigated by the FAA through my complaints, and had them call me a racist and tell me how violent I was and how vulgar I was, and just laid it on really thick, and it was all lies. Everybody, and these were people I didn't even work with directly. They worked on a different shift, and they were in fear for me and everything. They were in fear of their jobs is what it basically came down to, because they were doing illegal work. So I got called a racist for several weeks. They threw a bunch of colorful words around that I was calling people, and it was all untrue, but that was all they had. FedEx, they couldn't win with any facts, so they just brought in a bunch of people to slander and defame me.
And you also learned through discovery some things about FedEx and their relationship with FAA and OSHA. What did you learn that FedEx was doing to limit their liability?
You know, I had found out that there was in a repair. So we got emails during discovery back and forth between senior manager, managing director, I forget exactly whose names were on it, and the FAA in Memphis and they're trying to figure out how to make certain paperwork go away. They changed paperwork to make it legal. The problem is they didn't even know what they were looking at, so the paperwork's still illegal. It's more illegal than it was then, now, and just a lot of stuff like that. There was also, during my FAA investigation, there was ridiculous comments made. According to the regulations, FedEx is supposed to provide training for their employees for the tasks that they do. So I'm in the structures department, should be structures training. FedEx never had training, and they had a bunch of mechanics that weren't competent enough to do their jobs. So they fired me, and then within a couple, 2-3 months, they got a training program together because of the investigation. And then the FAA turns around and couldn't substantiate that they didn't have any training because, they opened up a new training class, but it was months after I got fired. So the FAA was doing everything in their power to protect FedEx.
And they were aware, the FAA was aware that FedEx had been violating the rules, the safety rules, which the FAA should have made sure that they were following.
Exactly. But, the FAA, it's political. It's very political. I found out. I didn't realize any of that until I got involved in this. I had a whole lot of respect for the FAA, my whole life. And there's good people in the FAA. I'm not going to say everybody in the FAA is bad, but there's a lot of political stuff that it shouldn't be happening.
And you were personally threatened, according to a release, the FedEx managing director threatened you that 50 angry men wanted to kick his ass if he did not stop complaining about unsafe repairs.
Yeah, he also had told me at one point, that's a true statement in a meeting. He threatened me with that. He also had told me that I'm so hated and disliked that people in Indianapolis are cheering on that I'm getting in trouble, and I didn't even know anybody in Indianapolis, so it was big intimidation. What's really bad and shows the corruption within the company is after this meeting where I filed a workplace violence over him, that threat of kicking my ass, and that was the beginning of 2012. I want to say January, February. Anyway, so I was terminated end of April, May 1st, something like that, and he was in charge of the whole thing. So even after he does things like that, threatens people, they still let him terminate me.
And isn't that a criminal violation of the law to threaten somebody physically?
You would think so, but, at FedEx, it is. I should have called the police. You get smart. Hindsight is 20/20. I should have had a lawyer 2 years before. Actually, when I got hired in there, if anybody ever decides they want a job at FedEx, they need to take a lawyer with them when they sign the paperwork and when they get hired in. But
well, maybe that's why they don't want to have a union. If they have a contract in a union, you do have more rights.
Exactly, and people don't realize that. They're making upwards of $60 an hour, overtime, the best benefits you could imagine there. But what happened to me, people don't realize that could happen to any of them, and that's why most of the people there just toe the line and do what they're expected to do, not legally, but per the company.
And also there was some evidence through email that the FAA was actually in collusion with FedEx, and so that they were conspiring with the company. Is that true?
Yeah, well, that's what we just touched base on. They were, I had a complaint about a specific repair, many specific repairs, but this one specific repair, and then the FAA goes back and forth with FedEx trying to figure out how to change the paperwork to make this repair legal, which it just was not legal. And they retired the airplane since, but it flew for 4 years after that. So it flew for 4 years with that repair on there. And, there's a lot of stuff, and I have to put it together. There's an airplane. There was another instance where I got hollered, and I swore at repeatedly and threatened to illegally delete discrepancies that I wrote up on an airplane, and I refused to do it. This was shortly before I got terminated. Well, FedEx had another mechanic go look at those repairs and just sign it off and let the airplane go. That airplane flew, it's still flying, but the airplane flew since 2012 to 2017 to the point where the corrosion got so bad there was cracks in the fuselage, which could have been catastrophic. And luckily, it got caught by somebody I know before it became a catastrophic accident, but that's because it got pencil whipped back in 2012.
And the criminal collusion between the FedEx and the FAA. Also, I understand there was collusion between FedEx and OSHA. Do you believe that these officials at FedEx and OSHA and FAA should be prosecuted if they were colluding to prevent proper health and safety process at FedEx?
No, they should be prosecuted because there's a systematic problem with the airlines, and nothing's going to change. I mean, nothing's going to change. We have, not just myself, but mechanics who still work there making complaints to the FAA. And FedEx just carries on like business as usual. They'll correct the problem right then and there when they get called out, but it doesn't change the culture within the company. And the FAA, they have a problem too, because, and this is a problem within our society, everybody looks at a college education a little too strongly, so you end up with a bunch of people within the FAA. They're looking for bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, and these people don't get their hands dirty and know what they're looking at. So when they did the investigation, the FAA told me, hey, Brian, we have mostly avionics guys because they have college educations, and they don't know what they're looking at. You know, and so I don't know. They need to get more people who actually have the knowledge and experience within the FAA.
And Daryl Whitman, as you said, was doing an investigation, and he himself was bullied, harassed, and fired by OSHA and Tom Perez, the head of the Department of Labor. They obstructed an investigation. So it seems like this is consistent with a systemic cover-up of not only the workers who are trying to protect themselves and the public, but also government officials who are trying to do their job and then get retaliated against.
Correct. And, you know, Tom Perez, that's a whole nother story. That guy, I forget what year it was, 2013, 2014. He was supposed to do an investigation in his office. He had a woman, Rita Lucero, and I'm in the middle of all this. So I tried reaching out to this lady several times, emailing her, trying to call her office. They didn't do anything. They were feeding the corruption. I mean, and what really I found through all this was one statement that President Obama made, that Fred Smith of FedEx is his favorite CEO, which I found very interesting, seeing that Mr. Smith is a staunch Republican. So, I mean, that should tell you something. It's all about money.
And you also had the situation of Scott Mugno, who was nominated by President Trump to be Director of Health and Safety. He's the Director of Maintenance, was the Director of Maintenance for FedEx, and he was in charge of maintenance of the airline section and trucking. But also you've come to know a number of other FedEx whistleblowers, Gary Brent. What's the story with these other people who worked in other parts of FedEx as far as health and safety?
You know, it's the same thing. Gary Brent drove truck for them in Florida, and shortly after, a few months after, same year, they fired him for the same thing. He's complaining about bad brakes, broken frames, bald tires, all kinds of safety violations, and he never even got to trial. They had OSHA so wrapped up, they started calling him a racist, like they did to me in court, and I think they even called him a pedophile. And when it came time for OSHA, to actually do an investigation, they said, well, if we investigate this, you're going to have to pay for the witnesses. If it goes to trial or whatever, then he would have to pay for the witnesses and the depositions and stuff. Now, who can pay for that? So, yeah, he's a fighter, though. I've talked to Gary several times. And he's a fighter. I don't think he's even given up yet, and that was 6 years ago.
And what does it say to American workers, mechanics, people who are trying to protect the health and safety, that when you try to do your job, you're conscientious, this is what happens to you. You get punished, retaliated, and the FedEx executives and owners are apparently they want to profiteer by not doing proper maintenance on the equipment that they are in charge of and responsible for.
Right. Yeah. I think your average person has a hard time seeing the grand scheme of things. So a worker in Memphis a couple years ago, maybe it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, gets killed working on an airplane. I think OSHA fined FedEx $7,000. So even my trial, there was 3 of us involved. FedEx spent a bunch of money defending themselves, but not all of FedEx. It's 4 different entities. Just the entity that I work for, FedEx Express, makes over $7 million in profit a day. That's money they just stick in their pocket. So people will look and go, oh, man, it's an $8 million settlement, which the government's going to probably get most of. That's nothing to them. So if they spend $8 million, big deal. They're saving hundreds of millions of dollars by not doing things the right way.
And this is obviously a very important issue for people in Los Angeles, that the planes there at FedEx could have crashed into Los Angeles, could have killed potentially thousands of people, an accident of FedEx plane. And yet, were you surprised that there had been no articles in the LA Times, in the New York Times, and in corporate media, corporate TV about FedEx losing a judgment of $8 million for failure to properly take care of the planes and retaliating against mechanics at LAX who are trying to protect the health and safety of the public?
You know, I'd like to say I'm surprised, but I'm not. I would have been 6 years ago. But I've talked extensively to a gentleman with the LA Times. I've talked extensively with a really good guy from the AP. Their editors in their newspapers or TV stations, I've tried to reach out to Fox and ABC, NBC, CBS, all of them. They want nothing to do with it because FedEx throws so much money around. There's no way they're gonna say anything negative about them.
So you're saying that FedEx not only controls the government, apparently, FAA and OSHA, but they also control the mainstream media, the corporate press. Is that what you're saying?
From what I've seen, like I said, I've been in contact with them for a long time now, and nobody will write a story. Even with the press release that my lawyer put out, there's a few articles on the internet from little entities that I've never heard of, honestly. But they put it out there, so congrats to them. But there's no major outlet that I've seen that has actually even published it on the internet.
So that tells you that the public is not really being informed of the dangers and the violations of law by these companies.
No, not at all. And even during our trial, I tried reaching out to even the local Los Angeles Fox and ABC, NBC, LA Times, which is right down the street from the courthouse. Literally, it's like a couple blocks. You can walk there. And I heard crickets. So
that's a serious issue as well. Well, I think that obviously there are ongoing issues about this, and FedEx probably will appeal that $8 million just to make sure that you don't get a penny from their illegal violations or threats and physical threats. But you're not giving up, and I think that the other mechanics as well, do they share your feeling that that this issue is going to continue and they're going to try to get some kind of justice?
Yeah, there's more complaints, not from me, but constant battle with a few of the mechanics that are trying to do the right thing. And like you said, I'm sure they're going to try and appeal, because they feel they can do whatever they want. But yeah, hopefully it all works out in the end.
I'm speaking with Daryl Whitman about the FedEx case and what was exposed in this trial in which there was a jury judgment against FedEx for falsification and really criminally covering up serious health and safety issues, serious safety problems. So, Daryl, why don't you talk about the specifics of what was discovered that FedEx was doing with the federal government in covering up their criminal role?
Well, I think what this case exposes is the collaboration between the Federal Aviation Administration and major corporate air carriers like FedEx. Because I've had other cases where the FAA has appeared to be collaborating with these corporations, and in this particular case, they have actually the evidence itself, emails showing high level of people in the FAA talking to people in FedEx about how to FAA could attack whistleblowers. Because these folks have to have an FAA license to work as an aircraft mechanic. So the company was colluding with the Federal Aviation Administration to deprive whistleblowers of their right to work. That's extraordinary. So And the fact that and I remember working briefly with the FAA on this case, that they represented, this was going to be the biggest non-accident investigation they'd ever conducted. They were assembling a team of experts. And it turned out to be, they sent 4 guys out to LA for 3 days, and then they disappeared. So it was all just smoke and mirrors. They either lack the competence or the will to actually conduct investigations to ensure that these companies are operating within the health and safety regulations.
And in this trial, actually, they got email, smoking gun, evidence that, in fact, there was actually illegal collusion between FedEx and the FAA. This was released in the transcripts in the trial. Yet it seems that the U.S. Attorney, the Attorney General, they're not pursuing this felony criminal activity by FedEx with these officials.
Well, this is a pattern. The same thing happened with Wells Fargo. When it's a political moment, they'll run around saying, we're going to conduct this investigation. They did that. They had the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco that was going to investigate. They impaneled a federal grand jury, and I gave an affidavit and documents absolutely proving that OSHA failed to investigate these cases, and it all disappeared. As soon as the election was over, it all disappeared. And I got very weird emails back from the Department of Justice when I kept pressing the issue. What are you doing? What happened to my submissions? Where's your investigation? They actually sent me an email about 9 months ago pleading with me. Please don't send us any more questions.
This is the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco about the Wells Fargo case.
Well, this was actually the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C.
So this is Sessions' Department of Justice asking you not to send any more information.
Please don't ask any more questions. And it was the one email I received from the Department of Justice where no one would put their name on it.
So, in other words, they're very conscious that there is corruption, criminal liability, and it's too hot to handle.
Apparently, there isn't the will, or there isn't the means, or people are, and I think I've heard from inside the federal government in D.C. that people are afraid. They're scared. They're afraid to lose their job. They're part of a swamp, and I think that is a good description of D.C. It's a swamp. They're trying to keep their head above water. They're surrounded by completely, thoroughly, openly corrupt people, and it's a scary time, I think, to be a high-level federal person, in working in the government if you have any ethics, because you're going to be targeted. You're going to find yourself squeezed out of your job, or worse. You look at what happened to some of the high-level whistleblowers like what's his name? Well, all of the security state people.
Edward Snowden.
Thomas
Chelsea
Brady,
Manning, Thomas Brady. Yeah.
You look at what happened to them. This was not just losing your job. This was a direct personal assault, physical assault on these people, and a threat to their life. That's pretty scary stuff, and it should give everybody pause that we are on the edge of losing control, if we have not already lost a good part of the control over the federal government, and it's more and more looking like it's the government against the people.
Well, if you don't have a political alternative, if it's a bipartisan systemic corruption of both politicians from the Democrats and Republicans, what alternative do the American people have politically?
They've got to organize themselves and get something done. I mean, again, as I said, with regard to the four of us federal whistleblowers, we cannot do this alone. You cannot win against, these are very powerful, very entrenched, very skillful crooks. And if you don't work with other people, if you don't get other people together and you don't organize, you're going to lose. And you don't want to lose. You do not want to lose. I've been here in Central Europe for almost 4 years in the post-Soviet world. And I'll tell you, you do not want to lose.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been speaking with Daryl Whitman. He was a federal OSHA investigator and lawyer and was in charge of investigating OSHA complaints from workers from many industries, nuclear industry, airline industry, and FedEx especially. And this is an ongoing struggle that he's engaged in. So thanks for joining us on Workweek Radio.
You're welcome, Steve.